Hi kids, welcome to another Art with Miss Leochner. Today, in our journey through art history, we are going to talk about the time period called Surrealism. Surrealism was an art movement that people used to draw out their dreams or ideas from fairy tales or fantasy stories. Salvador Dali is the most well-known painter of this movement. In fact, if you're a Leochner kid, we have one of the posters of one of his paintings hanging in the hallway by the art room. If you've seen the one where it looks like the clocks are being squished or melted, that's a Salvador Dali piece. We are going to talk about 3 different artists today. Then I'm going to show you my surrealism picture that I drew, and then I'm going to give you 3 things to look for in your drawing, and then you can draw your very own surrealism picture. So let's go ahead and get started.
Salvador Dali was one of the artists during the surrealism movement. As you can see, Salvador Dali liked to experiment with all kinds of things, not only just what he painted, but even the way he looked in trying to create a dreamlike effect. He waxed his mustache out really long and pointy, and then kind of is giving a surprised look with his eyes. Here is one of Salvador Dali's paintings from this surrealism time period. Surrealism took realistic things and placed them in a fantasy or imaginary world. Salvador Dali often painted images from dreams that he had while he was asleep. This painting, if you go to Leochner, might be one you have seen in the hallway because we have a poster of it up by the office leading to the art room. This is one of his most famous paintings because, as you can see, the background looks somewhat realistic, like we're looking out over at the ocean, maybe at sunrise or sunset with the different colors in the sky. Here's a cliff. The tree looks realistic as well, but then we get into the surrealism part, and if we take a closer look, these things hanging down are actually clocks. And that is a little, what's called a pocket watch, but it has little ants crawling all over it in a design. And then over here on this clock, if we look really closely, what does that look like to you? Yeah, a face on its side. Here's the eyebrow, there's the nose, and there's eyelashes. Salvador Dali titled this piece here about memory. So if you look at it for a little bit, you could see maybe he's forgetful about being somewhere on time. Maybe that's why there's so much time and the face is asleep. One thing that's interesting about surrealism, it really depends on what you see and the story you create in your head. So we found the components of surrealism art here in Dali's work. We have some realistic things combined with some non-realistic things like bending clocks, combined with some fantasy things where these ants are making a design on the back of this pocket watch. And of course, the interesting face. Let's take a look at another artist that was popular during this time. This is René Magritte, and he had a very big sense of humor. I like his surrealism art because it's cheerful, lively, and funny. As you can see, with his sense of humor in this self-portrait of his, he turned his hat upside down on the top of his head and then has a playful grin. Again, just like Dali, his self-portrait has the effects of surrealism in it as well. This is Magritte's most famous painting called The Son of Man. As you can see, it has, again, some of those realistic elements that we see in surrealism combined with the fantasy elements. He gives a somewhat realistic background. Obviously, maybe looks like a bridge overlooking some water or a lake with the clouds, and then the stone bridge. Although if we look really closely, the bridge has some pinks in it, just to give it a little bit of that fantasy effect. Now, Magritte called this a self-portrait. Well, we saw what he looked like. You can see some of the realistic elements in this self-portrait with the hat and the tie and the coat. But can you spot what makes this surrealism? Yes, that's right. He has an apple in the middle of his face. Magritte liked to draw himself like this in many of his paintings, where you couldn't see his face. It would either be hidden with objects like this apple. He has one that there's a bird behind it, or sometimes he would just not even have the face on the painting. He would just do the painting of the man from behind. So this is one of the trademarks in Magritte's art. This is our final artist we're going to talk about, Leonora Carrington. She was an artist out of England and then later moved to Mexico. She was one of the few female artists that were involved in the surrealism movement. Her basis for many of her paintings in the surrealism style were to combine fairy tales and fantasy stories, and some of those characters and images in her paintings. Let's take a look at one of her paintings now. This painting is called The Kitchen Garden Fire. Again, we can see some of the way the surrealism took place here in her painting. The house back here looks very realistic, along with the gardens here and the trees. But from a distance, if we look, it looks like in the middle of the tree from far away, there's almost like a beach shell in there. And the people are very dreamlike quality to them. The one woman here in the middle in the maroon robes, she's got very interesting hairdo. And then the woman on the right here in the blue, her hair almost looks like it's made out of wheat. In the tree over here, we actually see that the seashell is actually maybe some kind of tree fairy. And then if you notice, the rooster is very big. He's not in the right perspective. He's almost human size compared to the tree. In fact, all the chickens are really big here in her artwork. She drew upon fairy tales and myths of tree spirits and also garden spirits from the myth from Greek myths, where they believed that spirits lived in trees and plants and things like that. So again, we get the same kind of surrealism effect, where she has some realistic things, but some make-believe things as well. I went ahead and drew my own surrealism picture today because I want to talk with you about the parts that make it surrealistic, and then I want you to create your own out of your imagination and not necessarily follow along exactly with what Miss Leochner's doing today. So, in the inspiration of Dalí and Carrington with their everyday items starting to look a little different than normal, I imagined that my sky came in these different colors of red, blue, and pink. And as I was coloring what I thought was going to be the colorful clouds, it reminded me of when sometimes in art, when you're painting and you get a blob of paint onto your paper. So I decided that I would make my trees in this drawing paintbrushes. Then I thought back to Magritte and how he used realistic items in his drawings to add to the surrealistic effect. So I decided I was going to make a picnic. So I did a picnic basket and a blanket. And then I thought again back to Dalí and how he had the ants in his picture, and I decided to do a panda bear, but instead of it being realistic in the typical panda colors of black and white, I did 2 colors of purple. So this is my surrealistic drawing. What I want you to do is look for these 3 things when you are drawing. Okay, step 1 is planning out your background. I planned my green grass because grass is green, and then I started to work on my sky. I was imagining a sunset at first, and so that's why I started with the orange and the yellow,
But then I was adding some clouds in with the blue, and I realized that it looked like paint drops. So I gave a fantasy quality a little bit to my background with what I did with the sky. But for the most part, my background and setting are pretty realistic. So you want to think about that first in creating your own drawing. The next thing you want to think about in surrealism is adding a little bit of realistic elements. Again, think back to all three artists that we saw. While their pictures were definitely strange and dreamlike and very much make-believe type pictures, they still had a few realistic elements in it. My realistic elements were the picnic blanket and the picnic basket. I drew a panda bear in a realistic style, but then, as we'll see with our next step, I decided to do something a little bit different to give it that fantasy element. The third step is to add the fantasy, which is the fun part of the picture. You're taking something that could be realistic and giving it that imaginary quality. So instead of trees, as I said before, I put paintbrushes in, and then I colored my panda bear in colors of purple instead of black and white. I hope you have a great time putting together your surrealism drawings, and I can't wait to see them. Have a great day!